daylight. Did you know there comes a time in the spring where one whole hour just completely disappears? And then several months later in the fall, that hour completely reappears. It might sound like a magic trick, but it is not. What really happens is that we set our clocks forward during spring and then set it back to its original time when fall comes around. So why exactly did this crazy event begin? It dates back over 200 years ago to around 1784. The idea of having a time of daylight savings was brought up by Benjamin Franklin. It was to help solve the problem of having to light up homes and shops. Oil and gas lamps, along with candles, were the primary sources of light at this time. The problem was that they were all pretty expensive, so people tried to use these resources as little as possible. But this made it hard for them to do things that needed to be done after a long day's work. Dinner still had to be made, chores needed to be taken care of, and people needed time to relax and have fun. People could not even enjoy a good book without having to burn fuel. So Ben Franklin proposed the idea that we take a little time from the morning and move it to the evening. This would mean that we would move the time ahead by an hour so that the extra amount of daylight would be at the end of the day. The idea for daylight savings time had begun in England. At first, it was not a popular change. Soon, the idea caught on as people began to save money on candles and gas lamps. Daylight savings took longer to reach the United States. It was not until World War I and World War II that people began to realize that we needed to save on our energy resources. It took a lot of fuel to supply the war. People were getting nervous about how much fuel we had. Once again, the idea was that if people had more daylight hours or natural light from the sun, then they wouldn't have to use as much electricity in the evenings. Therefore, it was thought that people needed to adjust their schedules according to the sun. If people got home from work and had an extra hour of natural light from the sun, then they would not have to turn on their lights. This would save on how much electricity was being used. This seems to be backed up by facts in current times. Power companies have found that people use 5% less electricity during daylight saving time months. A third reason daylight savings time was suggested was because it was noticed that during the summer months the sun would come up and people would still be in bed. Blinds and curtains stayed closed for about the first hour of a new day. In the evenings, people would stay up well past sunset. So if we moved up the time in the spring, people would be getting up and moving around about the same time as the sun. It is a fact that the sun comes up earlier in the summer months. This would allow people to have more sunlight during the evenings. It just made sense. In 1976, a study in Australia found that nearly 3/4 of the people polled preferred to have daylight savings time because it gave them longer summer evenings. There are more than 70 countries that participate in daylight savings time, but there are 2 states in the U.S. that currently do not follow it. These are Hawaii and Arizona. It is not mandatory that states do it. There are many countries near the equator that also do not follow daylight savings. This is because the areas near the equator have almost equal amounts of day and nighttime hours. Therefore, it does not make sense for them to change their time or schedules. For the rest of the world, it can be very helpful.